The billionaire's hand slammed against the polished table. His voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the restaurant, furious in Japanese. The crystal glasses rattled, and every conversation around him fell silent. His face was red with anger, his words fast, clipped, and incomprehensible to nearly everyone in the room. The staff froze, their eyes darting nervously, waiting for someone, anyone, to step in. But not a single person understood him. The weight of his frustration was unbearable, hanging heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering, confused, fearful of what might come next. And just when it seemed no one would dare approach, a quiet waitress placed her tray down, took a breath, and stepped forward. What she said stunned the entire room. And in that instant, the story of one woman, unnoticed until then, would change everything. But how did it come to this moment? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. His name was Kaido. To the world, he was more than just a billionaire. He was a force, a man whose presence commanded every room he entered. He had built his empire on precision, control, and fearlessness. Yet behind the tailored suits and the aura of authority, there was a man known for a temper that could reduce boardrooms to silence. He didn't accept failure, not from his competitors, not from his employees, and certainly not from anyone who dared serve him. Tonight, in this upscale restaurant where gold-rimmed plates and crystal glasses were the norm, Kaido's fury boiled over. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, afraid to look too long yet unable to look away. The tension was sharp, reminding everyone why this man's name carried both respect and fear. But this wasn't just about food. Beneath his anger was something deeper, something that touched his pride and threatened his reputation. Then there was Clara. Unlike Kaido, she lived far from the world of influence and wealth. She was just another face in the crowd, a young woman who spent her nights balancing trays and wiping tables. To the guests, she was invisible, the kind of person you notice only when you need your glass refilled. Her shoes were worn, her hands roughened by constant work, yet her spirit carried a quiet resilience. Life hadn't been easy. Bills stacked on her counter at home, her mother's health weighed heavily on her shoulders, and every dollar she earned in this restaurant was a step towards survival. To her, this job wasn't a stepping stone, it was a lifeline. Losing it wasn't an option. That night, as Kaido's voice cut through the air, Clara knew one wrong move could cost her everything. Still, she was about to make a choice that would change her life forever. The restaurant itself was a world of contrasts. Velvet curtains framed the windows, soft candlelight bathed each table, and the air carried the scent of imported wine and seared steak. The wealthy dined here not for hunger, but for status, for the quiet assurance that they belonged in circles where money bought comfort and admiration. For Clara, it was a reminder of everything she didn't have. She moved carefully between tables, balancing her role with grace, though she often felt invisible in a place designed to celebrate excess. Tonight, however, invisibility was not an option. Kaido's rage had pulled every gaze toward the center of the room, where power and fragility were about to collide. And while the guests saw only a billionaire angry about a meal, the truth was far more dangerous. Kaido's fury wasn't just about food, it was about betrayal, and Clara, without realizing it, was stepping directly into the heart of it. Kaido's anger didn't cool, it intensified. His words snapped through the air like a whip, sharp syllables of Japanese that grew louder, faster, more impatient with every passing second. The waitstaff exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale, their movements hesitant as if one wrong step might cost them their jobs. Guests at nearby tables leaned closer, whispering, speculating, some even daring to smirk at the sight of powerful staff reduced to silence. For Kaido, humiliation was the one thing he could not stand. To him, confusion in his presence meant weakness, and weakness invited disrespect. The staff, desperate to help, gestured clumsily, bowing their heads in apology, yet none could offer him the one thing he demanded: understanding. Every second of silence felt like an insult, and in Kaido's world, insults demanded consequences. The room tightened with unease, the air itself thick with the weight of unspoken fear. In the midst of that silence stood Clara, tray in hand, heart racing. She felt the tremor in her chest, as if each beat reminded her of the risk she was about to take. She wasn't supposed to interfere. She was a waitress, nothing more. But as she looked at the faces of her colleagues, paralyzed with fear, and at the billionaire whose glare could shatter careers in a moment, she felt something stir inside her. A voice urged her to step forward, though another warned her of the danger. What if she overstepped? What if speaking cost her the very job she depended on? Still, Clara knew she had something no one else in that room did. She placed her tray carefully on the counter, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward Kaido. Guests gasped softly, their eyes following her, stunned that someone so small, so unnoticed, would dare approach him. Then it happened. Her voice, calm but steady, broke the silence in fluent Japanese. Every word was crisp, precise, carrying a tone of respect but also confidence. The shift in the room was immediate. Whispers ceased, jaws dropped, and Kaido's furious tirade faltered mid-sentence. For a man who prided himself on control, this was the last thing he expected. A waitress, a nobody in his eyes, speaking to him in his own language as if she belonged in his world. The shock rippled through the restaurant. Guests leaned back, eyes wide, wondering who this young woman really was. The staff stared at her as though seeing her for the first time, questions forming silently. How did she know? Where had she learned? Clara's secret was out, and with it came both awe and danger. Because while the room was stunned into admiration, Kaido's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just surprised, he was suspicious. Clara's words rolled effortlessly from her tongue, each phrase carefully chosen, her tone gentle yet firm. She translated Kaido's sharp demands for the staff, softening the edges just enough to protect them from the full force of his anger. The waiters, wide-eyed and grateful, obeyed quickly, moving with new urgency now that they understood his instructions. The room seemed to breathe again, tension loosening just slightly, though Kaido himself did not relax. Instead, his eyes followed Clara, every movement, every word, as if trying to solve a puzzle that should not exist. How could a waitress in an American restaurant, a woman whose name he had not even known minutes earlier, speak to him in flawless Japanese? He studied her not with admiration, but suspicion. Power had taught him never to trust appearances, and yet, despite himself, he was intrigued. Clara met his gaze, refusing to shrink under the weight of his authority. She translated his final command with clarity, then turned back to him with a composure that startled even her colleagues. For the first time that evening, Kaido's voice quieted, his fury tempered by curiosity. Then Clara said something, just one sentence, spoken softly in Japanese, that made him pause. His eyes flickered with recognition, though no one else could understand what had just passed between them. The restaurant, once suffocating with tension, seemed to freeze again, but for a different reason, a sense that something unexpected, something hidden, had just surfaced. Kaido leaned back slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line, and the silence that followed carried more weight than his anger ever had. It was clear she had struck a nerve. But who was Clara? That question hung in the air like an unfinished note. For the guests, she was just a waitress who had shocked them with her hidden talent. For Kaido, she was suddenly more, a mystery unraveling before his eyes. And behind Clara's steady voice, there was a story buried deep, a story no one in that restaurant could have guessed. Years ago, far from this polished dining room, Clara had lived another life abroad. She had walked unfamiliar streets, struggled to belong, and fought to keep secrets that could not be shared. Each word of Japanese she spoke now was tied to memories she rarely let herself recall. But what Kaido didn't know was that this waitress carried a story he could never imagine, and soon the truth of who Clara really was would begin to surface in ways no one in that room was prepared for. Kaido listened more closely now, his sharp ear catching details that others could not. It wasn't just that Clara spoke Japanese, it was how she spoke it. Her words were precise, elevated, laced with a formality rarely heard outside the walls of Tokyo's most elite academies and diplomatic circles. These weren't phrases picked up from travel or casual study. This was the language of privilege, of education reserved for the few who belonged to Japan's highest ranks. Kaido's expression shifted, his anger replaced with something colder, more calculating. The realization struck him harder than the initial shock. This young waitress was no ordinary woman. Around the room, guests leaned in, sensing his change. Whispers spread quickly. Admiration grew, but so did curiosity. Who was this girl, hidden in plain sight, who carried the voice of nobility in a place meant for service? And why was she here, serving tables instead of standing among the powerful? The atmosphere transformed in an instant. The same patrons who moments earlier dismissed Clara as invisible now watched her with wide-eyed fascination. Some exchanged knowing looks. Others murmured theories under their breath, their voices carrying just enough to feed the tension. The staff, too, looked at her differently, as if realizing that the woman who carried trays beside them every night might have been living a double life. For Clara, every glance felt like a spotlight, pressing in, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. Yet she stood steady, her face calm, her words flawless, even as her heart raced. Kaido, however, leaned forward, his suspicion hardening into certainty. He recognized the way she bowed slightly, the cadence of her speech, the respect layered into her tone. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. And then came the sentence that would change everything, the one moment the entire restaurant would remember. And that's when everything changed. Kaido's narrowed eyes softened just enough to reveal recognition of a world only a select few ever touched. Clara had revealed herself without meaning to, and now there was no going back. The billionaire's fury was gone, replaced by intrigue, suspicion, and something else, an almost reluctant respect. But with respect came questions, and with questions came danger. Around her the whispers only grew louder. Who was Clara really? Why would someone with such rare knowledge be living as a waitress, hidden beneath the weight of ordinary struggles? The room was no longer just watching a confrontation. It was watching a mystery unfold, a story clawing its way to the surface, demanding to be told. And as Kaido's gaze locked onto Clara, one truth became clear. Whatever secrets she carried, they would not remain secrets for long. Kaido waited until the last plate was cleared, until the eyes of the guests turned back to their meals, though the whispers had not stopped. Then, with a gesture sharp and deliberate, he called Clara aside. Away from the curious stares, his voice was low, controlled, but edged with demand. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" It wasn't a question born of admiration. It was a test, a challenge wrapped in suspicion. Clara's throat tightened. She had feared this moment, the one where her secret would no longer stay safely hidden. For a breath she considered silence, but Kaido's gaze left no room for retreat. With careful words, she revealed the truth. Years ago she had lived in Japan, not as a tourist, not as a visitor, but as someone who had tried to build a future there. A future that had slipped away, leaving her with nothing but memories and the language she now carried. She spoke of her younger self, full of hope, eager to learn, determined to belong. She recalled late nights studying under dim lights, mornings navigating crowded trains, afternoons dreaming of a career that would prove she was more than her circumstances. But then life shifted. Opportunities closed, doors slammed, and her dreams crumbled under the weight of reality. Clara returned home with little more than determination to survive. Her mother's illness grew worse, bills piled high, and her dream of building a life abroad gave way to the harsh necessity of keeping food on the table. That was why she stood here now, dressed in a uniform, carrying trays instead of ambitions, translating for a man who couldn't see the years of sacrifice behind her eyes. She wasn't ashamed. She had done what she must. But she never expected that her past would confront her in this way, in front of the very kind of man who had once symbolized the life she lost. Kaido listened, his sharp features betraying no obvious emotion, yet his silence carried weight. For the first time that evening, his voice did not lash out. It pressed, measured, and probing. He respected her courage to stand before him, to answer directly without trembling. Yet part of him still questioned her honesty. Was this woman telling the truth? Or was she weaving a story, hiding something beneath her carefully chosen words? Clara met his stare, refusing to look away. She had faced humiliation before, and she would not bow now. In that quiet corner of the restaurant, a strange tension grew, not of fury, but of something more complex. Respect and suspicion tangled together, blurring the line between threat and opportunity. And though Clara believed the worst had passed, she was wrong. Because what she could not know was simple and dangerous. This was only the beginning of her trial. Kaido was not finished. His questions had been answered, but his suspicion lingered, sharp as a blade. He returned to his table, gestured for Clara to follow, and then, with deliberate calm, addressed her before the entire room. In fluent Japanese, he posed a challenge, not to the staff this time, but to Clara herself. A delicate passage, spoken quickly, rich in nuance, and layered with meaning. It was not a command anyone could guess. It was a test of precision, of intellect, of belonging. Every eye turned toward Clara once again. The whispers died, glasses stilled, and even the music seemed to fade into silence. This was no longer about anger or misunderstanding. This was a trial set before her by a man who measured people by their ability to withstand pressure. If she faltered, humiliation would crush her. But if she succeeded, the night itself would shift in her favor. Clara's heart raced, yet her face betrayed nothing. She stood tall, inhaling slowly, letting the weight of the moment press down without breaking her resolve. The staff, frozen at the edges of the room, could barely breathe, their eyes pleading silently for her to succeed. The guests leaned in, captivated, knowing they were about to witness something rare. Clara closed her eyes for half a second, recalling the long hours spent mastering the language, the professors who had corrected her tone, the endless drills that had once felt impossible. She summoned not only her memory, but the part of her that refused to give up, the part that had carried her through years of sacrifice and disappointment. When she opened her eyes, there was clarity in them. Her voice, steady and sure, rose above the silence, shaping each word with elegance, carrying the weight of discipline, of courage, of truth. Narrator, slow, suspenseful. Her next words would not just save the night. They would change her life forever. Clara's voice carried through the restaurant like music, each syllable shaped with care, each phrase spoken with the dignity of someone who knew the weight of language and respect. She did not stumble, nor did she rush. Her translation was flawless, fluid, precise, layered with the grace that comes only from lived experience. As she spoke, Kaido's eyes narrowed, not in anger this time, but in something closer to disbelief. The sharp edges of his posture eased, his rigid shoulders softened, and for the first time that night, the man who controlled boardrooms and silenced rivals found himself silenced in awe. Around them, the tension that had suffocated the room dissolved. Guests leaned back, eyes wide, before the first sound of applause broke out, tentative at first, then rising into a wave that filled the restaurant. In that moment, Clara had not only translated words, she had transformed the night itself. Kaido sat still for a long breath, studying her as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the image of the waitress who had once been invisible. At last, he gave a slow nod, small, restrained yet heavy with meaning. It was the closest thing to approval he had given in years, and it carried more weight than 1,000 words of praise. For Clara, it was not just a victory, it was redemption. She had faced power and arrogance and answered not with fear, but with humble strength. And in that quiet acknowledgement, something remarkable happened. The wall between Billionaire and Waitress, between wealth and struggle, cracked just enough for respect to pass through. Kaido's fury was gone, replaced with admiration he could not hide. And though Clara would return home still carrying her burdens, she knew one truth was certain: her life would never be the same again. Sometimes the most overlooked person holds the greatest power. Clara's courage silenced arrogance, transformed fury into respect, and reminded everyone that dignity speaks louder than money. In a room filled with whispers, wealth, and judgment, she proved that strength isn't found in titles or fortunes. It's found in the quiet resolve to stand firm when it matters most. Her story is not just about language or translation. It is about the moment a woman who had been invisible chose to step into the light, risking everything for truth and grace. And in doing so, she changed the way even a billionaire saw the world. Her life, once hidden in the shadows of struggle, carried a new weight, a new meaning. For those who watched her that night, the lesson was unforgettable. Never underestimate the strength of a soul determined to hold on to dignity, even in the face of power. Narrator: what would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have dared to step forward, risking everything for the chance to be heard? Or would you have stayed silent, hoping the storm would pass? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Your voice, like Clara's, matters more than you may realize. And if this story inspired you, hit the like button. It helps us reach more people who need to hear stories of courage just like this one. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories every single week. Until next time, remember, strength isn't measured by wealth, but by the courage to stand tall when it matters most.